This
I
conference
guess,
will now be recorded.
thanks. I thought we'd quickly just go through what I might have talked about before as a quick brief for those who haven't heard it. And then I want to introduce, I guess, some new material. So just quickly, one of the things that is the main feature in Luke's Gospel, and TJ Redding does an amazing connection in this, is the story that Luke's Gospel is the gospel of friendship. And we find the theme of friendship coming through Luke's Gospel time and again. And obviously, it begins with this story of Theophilus, who Luke is writing to, whose name literally means friend of God. And when you follow through the themes, we find, and I think I did an exhortation on this as well. The story of Abraham comes up a lot in Luke's gospel. In fact, Abraham's mentioned more in Luke's gospel than all the other gospels put together. And that's because Abraham was recorded as the one who was called a friend of God. And the thing is, it's because Abraham believed and trusted in God. And so this story is about building trust, which is establishing friendships. And when you go through Luke's gospel, it comes up over and again. And one of the other key phrases which comes out is in the face of, or looking into something. So of John the Baptist, I will send him before my face that he might declare the way to you, or prepare the way of the Lord. So this is a great little picture of Zebulun a few years ago. When you meet face to face, it's easier to see eye to eye. And in an exhortation talking about friendship a year or so back, the Jews believe there are different levels of friendship seen in the way people walk together or how they share meals together. So one might invite a friend to a concert or a sports match because they have a common interest in music or sports. And so it's a subject friendship. It's not necessarily a personal friendship. It's just they're wanting company and they both know they share this passion. So that's a level of friendship that is what we might call a subject friendship. There's a more personal friendship where two walk together because they enjoy each other's company, and it's not necessarily that they just enjoy hiking or they're going to a concert. It's they actually enjoy and share each other's company, so they walk and talk together. That's a more intimate friendship. It's a relational friendship as opposed to a subject friendship. The final one is when you share fellowship, which is the key. When you're sharing fellowship with a person and you're sharing a meal and you're sitting opposite a person and you've invited them to your home and into your home and sharing a meal with them, and that's when you see face to face. And that's actually the friendship where Abraham had this friendship with God, and God says when he was going to reveal to Abraham what he was going to do at Sodom and Gomorrah, he said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, seeing he has become my intimate friend?" So true friends trust each other with deep secrets, and they're able to share these together. So that's why in Luke's gospel, you actually find that there's 10 meals that Jesus has in different people's places. There's the banquet at Levi's house, the dinner at Simon the Pharisee's house, the one with the sinful woman that comes into the house, washes Jesus' feet, the breaking of bread at Bethsaida, Mary and Martha, the story is recorded in Luke. Another two Pharisee homes that are mentioned. The home of Zacchaeus, when he goes into Zacchaeus' house and has a meal. The Last Supper. And then there's two in the very last chapter of Luke. So the two stories of the final meals in Luke come in Luke chapter 24, the breaking of bread in Emmaus and the dinner with the disciples in Jerusalem. So you can see how Luke places this real emphasis on fellowship meals. And this story on the two on the road to Emmaus, we've discussed, it's about rebuilding trust and friendship with these two disciples. Because as we go through Luke chapter 24 and in this story, you'll see that that is the problem of these two disciples. When Jesus appears before them and slowly walks alongside them and enters into their conversation, their comments to Jesus in verse 21 was that we had hoped, we had trusted that this man was going to be the one that would deliver us, redeem us from the Romans. So they have lost their trust, and they're losing their hope in Jesus. And so Jesus enters into this conversation with them. And so you might remember our story about trust. By the way, this is my favorite picture of the two on the road to Emmaus, because we'll look at this, but this is one of the few pictures that you find where it actually shows a man and a woman talking with Jesus. And I think there's real evidence, or there's reasonable evidence, that these two are actually man and wife. I'll give you one quickly that I might not have given you before. It says, what's the verse? Verse 15, while they were talking with or verse 14, while they were talking about all these things, what happened, while they were talking and discussing together. There's two parts to that phrase, while they were talking and discussing. The second part is in a very, what you might call negative, controversial sense. It's probably better translated while they were talking and disputing. So they were arguing. So there's my evidence that they had to be man and wife. Sorry, that's my tacky joke at the moment. But it will come back to that. There is something in this conversation where these two disciples are not agreeing with each other. They were disputing certain things, and we'll come back to it. So they're going from Jerusalem to Emmaus, and they are sad, depressed, because they had only a week earlier lifted up palm branches and cried with the crowds and said, "Blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord, Hosanna in the highest." And they were elevated to the heights, if you like, in their imagination and desire of Jesus being made king. And it's now like somebody's just popped their balloon. They are completely, absolutely deflated. So if you remember, a few years ago, I did this exhort on what are the three building blocks of trust. And these are the three building blocks that psychologists say establish trust. The first one is an emotional connection, and the key phrase is empathy. We establish trust with somebody because they want to know about our stories. They're interested in us personally, or we have to share with them. We have to become vulnerable. That's why the most trusted professions are normally in the medical profession, be it doctors, nurses, paramedics, but psychiatrists, or in the mental health industry, people have to share their vulnerabilities, and these professionals are amazing in terms of learning empathy, because they have to learn how to stay out of judgment to be able to deal with people. So that's the first key to building trust, is being able to really connect emotionally and being prepared to listen. And that's the hardest thing about empathy, being prepared to listen to other people's stories and stay out of judgment. The other thing is we trust things that are logical, that make sense, that they need to add up. You know, if the math doesn't add up, we won't trust it. We put our lives on the line every time we hop on a plane. You know, to think that this tin can somehow stay upright in the air and keep us alive, and we're prepared to actually trust that. And the reason why is because we have come to learn and understand the physics. Even if we don't understand it completely, we know there's science behind it. We know it's been tested and it's been proven. So we trust the logic of that. So that's the second thing. And that's the beauty, by the way, of our faith. Our faith is so amazing because it's so logical. The truth, as we know it, our understanding of the Bible makes perfect sense. There's a lot of things about Christianity, the Trinity, which makes is completely illogical and explainable. So our understanding's logical. And things even like when you die, you either go to heaven or go to hell. You know, like after the resurrection, it says there was many that slept, that arose after Jesus was risen and went into the city. I wonder how, you know, people go in thinking about that when they went to see those people and say, oh, wow, so where did you end up? Did you go to heaven or did you go to hell? And why are you back again? So you can see that has not a lot of logic sense. The other thing is authenticity. So we trust brands because of their tried and tested character. So authenticity or genuineness normally comes through time. It comes through something being tested or put to the test. Obviously, in my slide, one of these ducklings is the real article, the other one's not. And if you think about knockoff brands, the reason why we trust in certain cars, and cars have a certain brand or a certain label, it might be for German performance. They build those brands over years and years and years, and they are put it to the test. And you know, when you first go and buy those knockoff brands, I remember buying an iPhone in Pakistan. It was my first iPhone. Got them out of the box, it didn't even work. I couldn't even connect them. They were, mind you, they were $5. I probably should have known that they were. I knew they were knockoffs. I just thought they might have performed a little bit better. The box was probably worth more than the phones. So if you remember, for those who can remember this exhort, a few years ago, I gave an acronym, ELLA, empathy, logic, authenticity, to remember the building blocks of trust. Because when you see them in the Bible, you'll see them come up over and over again, and how God establishes trust in other people. A great one is Hezekiah. He was one that trusted like no other. And you'll see how Hezekiah is amazing in terms of his empathy to the people, his logic and his reasoning, and finally his authenticity when he actually basically gets off his deathbed and proves to everybody that he is the Lord's chosen. And I often like this story when when my kids were much younger and we went to a pool. This is a typical thing that happens, where the kids are at the pool and you, as a father, you say, jump, I've got you. And so my two boys were there, and I remember saying to Pete, jump, I'll catch you. And Pete at that age was probably about 7, and He had no fear of jumping in. A little while later, Pete was in the pool, quite confident, and Justin, who was about 3, was standing there, and Pete saying, "Jump, Justin, I'll catch you." And there was simply no way that Justin was going to jump. And at 3 years old, he went through all of those things. He just went through empathy. Will Peter catch me? Does he really want to catch me? Probably not. Logic, can Peter catch me? Probably not. Authenticity, has he ever proven himself to be able to do such a thing? Definitely not. So that's, a good little analogy. Now you'll see the way Jesus does this with the 2 on the road to Emmaus. As you go through this record from verse 13, notice how Jesus is constantly asking them questions. He walks up to them as they're leaving Jerusalem and just enters their conversation, which seems kind of rude when you think about it. They were obviously having a very deep and meaningful conversation, and maybe even a heated conversation. And a stranger comes out of nowhere and says, "What you talking about?" Now, I don't know about you, my first thought would be, none of your business. But Jesus enters into their conversation in a gentle way, and they say, when he asks them, verse 16, one of them, named Cleopas, answered, "Are you the only visitor in Jerusalem who doesn't know the things that have happened?" So, and then Jesus turns around and says, "Well, what things?" And they said, "Well, concerning Jesus of Nazareth, and how he was a prophet, mighty indeed." And so you'll see how Jesus brings out their story. I think he does it again, doesn't he? 16. Yeah, verse 16. Yeah, where he first starts to say, he asks, "What's the conversation you're talking about?" And then he's building now and say, "Tell me more." So you'll see how he's interested in their story, and this is a true empathetic response. When, of course, they tell him this whole thing concerning himself, then Jesus turns around and says, "Oh, fools and slow of heart, ought not Jesus to have suffered these things?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them everything concerning himself. What an amazing conversation and time that would have been, as Jesus just brought out the evidence. Had a few of our young people around for CYC one night, and we gave them the number 22 to remember some of the things that Jesus might have referred to or gone back to when he talked about Moses and the Psalms and all the prophets. Genesis 22 is the story of Abraham offering up Isaac, which is one of the first real key evidences that God would give his son, and that the things that have been witnessed in Jerusalem were foretold as what was seen in Moriah way back then. Psalm 22, of course, an incredible psalm which links so many connections in Matthew, where it talks about they pierce my hands and feet, they divide my garments. It's got the phrase, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" And then it finishes with, "I will declare his name amongst the congregation." So Psalm 22, a lovely quote declaring Jesus' sufferings. Isaiah 22:22, "The key to the house of David I will lay on his shoulders, and he shall open and no man shall shut, and he shall shut and no man shall open." So Jesus would have gone to a lot of places. There's lots of resurrection quotes. Psalm 16, "You will not suffer your Holy One to see corruption." Daniel 12, "Many of them that sleep in the dust shall awake." and lots of quotes all about how he would be the one to restore Israel through his death. The suffering servant songs in Isaiah, from Isaiah chapter 40, is all about how the suffering servant is the one to redeem Israel. So the two on the road to Emmaus were saying, we thought he was going to be the one that would redeem Israel, but he's suffered and died. It makes no sense. When in fact, it made perfect sense. Then finally, authenticity. This is one of the key things as you go through not just Luke's gospel, but it's there in John's record. We looked at it with Thomas. Happens twice in this record. It says Jesus was made known to them in the breaking of bread. And then later in the same chapter, he reveals himself to the disciples in Jerusalem, and he shows them his hands, and he says, touch me and see. So the authentic side of things, it was like, touch and feel. This is not fake. I'm not a spirit, and here's the evidence is in my hands. So this is something which, by the way, comes up heaps of times in the New Testament. The epistles of John. This is the word of God which we have seen, our eyes have seen, and we have handled, and we have touched. So they fully understood this brand. That's what the marks in his hand were. They were the brand of authenticity. And then, of course, the reaction to all of this after he's made known to them, it says in their discussion, he disappears, and it says, they said one to another, did not our hearts burn within us? And there's this wonderful connection, of course, to Jeremiah, where he just said, I tried not to speak God's word, but his word was inside me like a fire that was just burning and locked up, and it ignited, and I couldn't contain it. And for fire to, be produced, it needs this incredible chemical reaction. It needs to have a source of fuel, which we can see as the word of God, the oil in our lamp. It needs air, which is the Spirit of God, but it needs something amazing to connect and unite that and to cause combustion. And this was really their faith, wasn't it? It ignited their faith by having the fuel, receiving the word, and listening to Jesus and him revealing to him that suddenly went woof and ignited the heat. And then it says they ran back to Jerusalem. That same hour, by the way. Now, that's the quick half-hour summary of what maybe people have heard before. Now I want to talk about something completely new, I think, in terms of this story. So if you haven't fallen asleep, please pinch yourself, because I think you might find this interesting. I certainly did. So one of the things with this story, I kept asking myself, why? What's this really about? And my thought was that these two on the road to Emmaus represented us. They represented these unknown disciples going to an unknown place, all because it was trying to teach us how Jesus interacts with us secretly, and the way the Spirit works in our lives, and the way Jesus walks amongst the candlesticks. Now, I think that's still true, but the more I ask myself why, there's something that really bugged me about this story when I did the close encounters with Jesus. At this stage, Jesus has only appeared to Mary Magdalene and the woman at the tomb, and possibly Peter. although I think maybe he actually appears to Peter sometime almost immediately after this event, before these two disciples get back to Jerusalem. But I think it's only Mary Magdalene and the woman. And here's the question. Emmaus is 11 kilometers from Jerusalem. It's a long journey. This is going to take you a long time. Now, Jesus has just been risen from the dead. He's alive, and his closest companions, his disciples that have been with him for 3.5 years, he hasn't revealed himself to them yet. And he's going to go on an 11K journey with two unknown disciples, have a meal with them before he comes back to show himself to the other disciples. Doesn't that sound strange to you? Wouldn't you think that Jesus would have just been like, the first thing he'd want to do would be to reveal himself to John, the disciple whom he loved? But at this stage, he hasn't revealed himself to John. So what's the story about these two disciples? So that led me to a lot of questions. So here's some interesting thoughts. Up until recently, this picture taken from the Biblical Archaeological Society was taken or this article was taken from around 2012. And around 2012, they were looking at all the various contenders for this place, Emmaus. Now, you should be able to find it pretty easy, because all you do is you find Jerusalem in the center and map out 7 miles, 11 kilometers, or 60 stadia from Jerusalem, and you should be able to find something that fits the bill. There were 9 different contenders for this up until the last sort of 12 years. And the most recognized one was Emmaus Nicopolis, which is actually some 17 miles from Jerusalem. Now, that was the most likely contender in amongst the Biblical Archaeological Society. Now, I don't know about you, but these disciples, that doesn't really make much sense, because 17 miles, that's half a marathon. So they've walked there one night, and they enticed Jesus to come inside and have a meal with them because it's getting late. And then Jesus disappears, and then they ran back that same hour to Jerusalem. I just don't think that's possible. So there were a lot of questions. It didn't make sense. So that's the first issue around this story, Emmaus, was where is this location? What is this place? We know that it's 60 stadia, and that's the record. I'm going to suggest to you that when you go through the Old Testament, 60 becomes a significant number, and there's one place in particular where it's mentioned, where Nebuchadnezzar made an image 60 cubits high. It represented the kingdoms of men. And by an amazing coincidence, when you go and look at your concordances and look up Nebuchadnezzar, you will find he appears exactly 60 times in the Bible. Now, you might think that's just an amazing coincidence. But when you look at Jerusalem in the New Testament, which appears, I think it appears 83 times. William Mounce, by the way, is a Greek authority, a modern Greek authority. He says 77 times Jerusalem is used as a proper name in the New Testament. So I just think that's amazing. 77 times its proper name is used. So just put that aside. Interesting. Kingdoms of men, 60 stadia, Jerusalem, 77 times used as a proper name in the New Testament. One thing we do know about Emmaus, and this is really accepted by all the lexicons and the Greek experts, is that Emmaus means warm baths. So we have something about the place in terms we know what it means, and it's likely that this place, Emmaus, was known for perennial springs, which are all around Jerusalem, and that these ones maybe had some warm baths. While we were in the UK, we went to Bath, and it was renowned for having warm baths, and it was actually built around the same time as Jesus went on this journey. Interesting. And then who's this guy? Who's this guy, Cleopas? A lot have tried to make connection with him to another disciple mentioned at the cross, or Mary, the wife of Clopas. From what I've read, there is an interesting connection, I guess, in the English words, but one word is actually Greek, and the other word is of Aramaic origin. So they're actually very different names. Cleopas comes from Cleopatra. It's a Greek word, as opposed to Clopas, which is of an Aramaic origin. So we don't really know who this man is. But again, it must be important in terms of his name. So let's just quickly do this. Sorry about the Greek, but the name Cleopas means of a renowned father. As I said, it's a contracted form of Cleopatris. It's made up of two words, and these are the two Greek words that make up the name Cleopas in Strong's. So Patris, or Pater, is found in the New Testament 418 times. It's the word for father, father's father. That's why it's the son of a renowned father, or an honored father. But this word, kleos, which means glory or praise, interestingly, is only found in one place in the New Testament. So this word Cleopas, the key word to his name, is only found in one place, and here it is. First Peter says, and I've picked the NET translation for this. It says, "For what credit?" Some translations say, "For what glory?" or "For what honor is it?" What is your honor? Is it if you sin and you are mistreated and you endure it? But if you do good and suffer and endure, now this finds favor with God. For this you were called to, since Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example to follow in his footsteps. And in the context of Peter, what Peter is showing is this willing offering, this willing sacrifice, like Jesus, who willingly gave himself to be mistreated and to endure it for the glory of God. And the record in Peter finishes, "For we were all going astray like sheep, but now you have turned back to the shepherd, the guardian of your souls." So that's the only time this word from Cleopas, the root of his word, is found in the New Testament. If you were trying to find his equivalent in the Old Testament, it would actually be this name, Abinadab. My father is noble, or my father is willing. Abi Nadab is the same equivalent to Cleopas, Kleos Pater. Father is willing or noble or honorable. So that's interesting. Abinadab. He was the man, by the way, of Gibeah who sheltered the Ark of the Covenant. In fact, the word Nadab, interesting here, the root word, it says to offer something with a willing heart as a sign of honor. Now that's exactly the same meaning as Cleopas or Cleopatra, Cleospatra. So you might be wondering where I'm going here, but wait, I think we're going to join the dots. So the story of Abinadab is the story about how the Ark of the Covenant came out of the house of the Philistines and it was brought into Kiriath Jearim, and it was brought to reside in the house of Abinadab the priest. And Abinadab the priest looked after the ark for 20 years. It sat in limbo in Kiriath Jearim, protected by Abinadab, until David brought it up into Jerusalem. And it stayed there for 20 years. Now, what's interesting in the story of Abinadab, he was the willing one to do this. Now, you might think, well, that's what's hard about that? You know, he's still looking after the ark. You have to remember, everyone thought the Ark of the Covenant was a good luck charm. It was like for them, their talesmen, that they would go about and bring them luck, except the opposite happened everywhere the ark went. Wherever the ark went in the house of the Philistines, bad things happened. And even when it came back into Israel, bad things happened because it wasn't looked after by a priest. So for Abinadab to turn around and say, oh, I'll look after the ark, it can come to me, oh, he was taking on a pretty big responsibility to look after the ark. Incidentally, my little thing on God used the cows are also a story of willing sacrifice. The story of how the ark gets there is the Philistines said, go and find 2 cows that have never been yoked or used in work service and that have given birth to calves. Take their calves off them, tie the ark to the cows, and then see if they can find their way home. So it was like, if the cows were willing, after not having their calves and not being trained to pull a cart, to somehow work together perfectly to take the cart into the land of Israel, then it must be of God. So they become the willing servants. Just a little side. Okay, what's this all got to do with anything? In 2017, between 2017, the University of Tel Aviv, in a conjunction with the French University, began to do a serious amount of excavations on an area outside Jerusalem. And over that area, they believe that they have discovered the town of Emmaus, and happens to believe that it is in fact the very same area of Kiriath Jearim where the Ark of the Covenant sat in limbo for some 20 years. Now, there are still other contenders, but this one fits the bill. So Kiriath Jearim is Abu Ghush, as you see there, and you see your 60 stadia line. It is actually a perfect 60 stadia, or 7 miles from Jerusalem. And the things that they found there is evidence of a Hebrew community dating back, right back to the times of David and the Judean and Israelite kingdom. And the evidence is that this is Kiriath Jearim, or in Jesus' day, Emmaus. So that's fascinating, really interesting in this story. But there's more to this story. So this was the picture of the ark, how it traveled from Shiloh. It ended up in the Philistines. The solid line is where it went all through the Gaza Strip, and bad things happened to Philistia wherever it went. And then it was taken from Ekron by the cows to Beth Shemesh, and then it ended up at Kiriath Jearim for 20 years. It sat there at Kiriath Jearim waiting till David brought it to Jerusalem. Here's something interesting about Kiriath Jearim. The name Kiriath Jearim, and Darren will love this, are those little symbols there, by the way, are the Hebrew symbols, which unfortunately, when you copy and paste out of the ancient Hebrew, they don't come in as symbols. But these are the ancient Hebrew symbols for Kiriath Jearim, and I'm sure Darren would like to look this up. But behind the name Kiriath Jearim, it means to waken or open the eyes from darkness, or to become dark. It has the idea of becoming dark or opening the eyes. Now, you might see the connection with our story. So you'll see what happens when Jesus goes in to have dinner with these disciples. So he goes in and in verse 29, they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, for the night's far spent." And as he sat at the table, he took bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened and they recognized him. Does that sound like a bit of an echo to you? Their eyes were open and they knew. I wonder if anyone knows where that phrase comes from. Their eyes were open and they knew that they were naked. That is, in fact, the exact phrase in the Greek, in the Old Testament Septuagint, used of Adam and Eve. After they ate of what they were not allowed to eat, it says the eyes of the two of them were opened and they knew that they were naked. This phrase here in Luke, after they eat with Jesus the bread of life, it says their eyes were opened and they knew him. And the difference is, after eating the forbidden fruit, Adam and Eve were driven away from the center of worship, from the place where God had set up the ark, the temple of God in Eden, and they were driven out of the garden. These two, after they eat of the tree of life with Jesus, ignite on fire and they race back to Jerusalem. There's more to this. The phrases, of course, of Emmaus being lukewarm and eyes being blind and being naked are shared, of course, with the story of Laodicea, where the Laodiceans, of course, were lukewarm and their eyes were holden and they were blind and they were naked. And Jesus goes out of his way to do what? To go and find and knock at the door of the Laodiceans so he could go into them. Now, here's the power of this story. And this gives me goosebumps when you stop and think about it. Why did Jesus go out of his way 11 kilometers to Emmaus? Was it just to fulfill an amazing Bible story, an incredible Bible connection with Kiriath Jearim and the Ark, which it does? I don't think so. I think the main reason is these two disciples were leaving Jerusalem because they were afraid. Because in Jerusalem, after Jesus' death, they were terrified. They were meeting together behind locked doors and they were afraid, but they were told to stay there and wait. And that they knew a significant deadline. 3 days. Jesus had told them time and again, in 3 days, he would be raised again. And in this conversation as going between these two disciples, they're going away from Jerusalem. They're going home to a place called Lukewarm. And they're having an argument on the way. And one of them is saying, and besides now, it's been 3 days. We waited long enough. It's been 3 days since this has happened. And so Jesus is going to go out of his way to bring them back. Why? Because Luke's gospel is about the lost coin. Luke's gospel is about the prodigal son. It's about how far Jesus will go to recover the lost. He was prepared to leave his closest disciples in Jerusalem because they were there in fellowship and they were in the right place, and go on a journey to get these two disciples. How far does he go to get the lost sheep? He goes as far as it takes to get the lost sheep. And you'll notice that at the end of this chapter, he tells them to remain in Jerusalem. And he says, behold, I am sending the promise of my Father. And he tells them that it shall all happen, beginning at, sorry, I'm not seeing my Bible too well. Would you like to read that, dear? Yeah, verse 49. Behold, I am sending the promise of my Father upon you, but stay in the city until you be clothed on high. And then it says in verse 32, and they worshipped and returned to Jerusalem with great joy and were continually in the temple. And when you come to Acts chapter 1, in Acts chapter 1, it says in verse 4, and while staying with them, he ordered them not to depart from Jerusalem, but to wait till the promise of the Father that you've heard of me. And so the point was, Jesus had given them specific instruction about remaining in Jerusalem despite the fear, despite the danger, because he was going to promise to give them the Holy Spirit, and that the word of God would go forth from Jerusalem. So he's gone to Emmaus to bring these lost all the way back. I just think this is the incredible story of how Jesus goes about to redeem and recover. And it's the same story of Laodicea. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone opens, I will come into him and I will sup with him. So, thank you.